may foolishly imagine ourselves to be self-made individuals, autonomous, rational and moral agents. We are certainly nothing of the kind. We are the products of the states that form us. The citizen, so much more than the medieval serf or subject, is produced by the state. Through the process of state education, culture, economy, industry and, if required, the justice system and the penitentiary, the state moulds and forms its children into nationals and citizens, mentally and spiritually shaped people conditioned to maintain and indeed reproduce the state. Never in the history of state power has it been a benefit to power to train citizens to see their common humanity with foreigners over and above their allegiance to king and country. The imagined existence of the unfettered sovereign individual is either the Foucauldian madman or the Nietzschean Superman. Such a person exists nowhere outside the madhouse or the prison cell. In this regard, the modern liberal democracy is not different to the most repressive, despotic and totalitarian regime. Sure, the citizens of a democracy have more rights and freedoms than people living in somewhere like North Korea, but the underlying reality of power remains the same. North Korea is unarguably a horrible supermax prison. Ours is an open prison, but a prison nonetheless. Frederick Douglass, the African-American abolitionist and author, delivered his 1857 West India Emancipation Address in New York, in which he famously observed, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." What we think of as democracy is a concession of power. We live in a hegemonic and controlled society in which we have been permitted a democratic say in how we are governed. On the face of it, this sounds really good. But this say we believe we have over the exercise of state power is an illusion. If voting made any difference, runs the bogus Mark Twain quote, they wouldn't let us do it. Twain didn't say this, but whoever did was absolutely right. Voting in the modern democracy changes nothing. Nothing of consequence, that is, which is not supported by at least a sizable fraction of the ruling establishment, and every society has a ruling class. No democracy has sprung from a void. Rather, democracy is the result of the evolution of the exercise of absolute and sovereign power, changing over time as it conforms to the changing demands of the governed. All power, even absolute power, is negotiated power. Douglass himself admits to this. Find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. Every tyrant knows that too much violence and brutality will end with their head on a pike. Therefore, power must discover what most people will quietly submit to, and use the instruments of the insane asylum and the jail to discipline the rest, the malcontents and the so-called freethinkers and radicals. This is precisely how the ruling class continues to rule through the modern liberal democracy. Real power remains hidden and in absolute control so long as the governed believe they have the power at the ballot box to change the world. Henry Ford understood this. You can have any colour you like so long as it is black. So long as the people's choices are limited enough so as not to challenge power, and so long as they choose what those in power want, democracy prevails. The instant this tension is broken and the people challenge power, the ruling establishment releases the hounds and suspends democracy. Ask Salvador Allende about this. The modern liberal democratic project was not for the most part the result of revolution, but instead the efforts of pre-democratic monarchic and absolutist ruling classes to maintain power by preventing revolution. It was the period of European history from the French Revolution in 1789 to the 1884 year of revolutions that woke the powers of Europe up to the threat of popular revolt. Their survival then had to be a careful negotiation of power. These powers, knowing the writing was on the wall, made concessions to democracy. But this was only ever a controlled democracy. It would never fully relinquish the reins of power. What the people were given was just enough control for them to quietly accept their old masters in new guise, as the custodians and protectors of the state, as the dominant and ruling class, a class which maintained real power because it controlled the wealth and resources of the nation. Capitalism, with its eventual fusion with the state and the dominant class qua neoliberalism, constructed the system in which the ruling class would maintain absolute control of the means of production. And in this way, the employment and well-being of the worker was tied to the worker's continued support for the moneyed class. Earning a crust meant workers were forced to vote against their interests. Control of the media, the principal instrument of state propaganda, ensured the informed consent of the electorate was always informed in such a way that it benefited the dominant class over and against the interests of ordinary working people. We see this continue almost entirely unchanged still, but with the use of two common tricks: Tweedism and Entryism. Tweedism has been perfected in the United States, the so-called greatest democracy in the world, where the people are given a choice. A simple choice between the entirely compromised representatives of the factions of the ruling class. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats represent the economic and political interests of working people. Both are servants of the military-industrial complex and big money. The American choice is between socially and religiously conservative neoliberalism and a more secular and progressive version of the same. Both exist to protect the interests and the power of the billionaire class. In Europe, the home of socialist revolutionary ideas, the preferred weapon is Entryism, a clever manoeuvre in which members of the professional and bourgeois political class join and so dominate and derail the political parties of the working class. Britain gives us the best example of this pink socialism, with characters such as Tony Blair and Lord Keir Starmer, the leaders of Britain's working class. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they remain the same. We have democracy in the West because we are allowed to have a democracy. That it does not benefit working people is not a sign that the system is broken. How democracy fails workers is a feature of the system. We are permitted to vote to keep us docile, to give us the impression of popular power, when in reality, nothing has changed. The ruling class remains the dominant class precisely because the democratic system is working. It is the inability of this system to change the conditions of the working class that is right now leading to a crisis of liberal democracy, which in turn is giving rise to the built-in safety feature of this system: fascism as capitalism in crisis. Thanks for listening.